The United States of America is a repeat offender when it comes to arming criminals, terror groups, rogue regimes.
Hi, Kylie here, back with another reaction video. Today it's thinkschool's how USA uses the evil war strategy to manipulate the world. US war business strategy exposed. This looks really good, so let's get to it.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
The United States of America is a repeat offender when it comes to arming criminals, terror groups, rogue regimes.
In a recent Vice News interview, President Barack Obama blamed the existence of ISIS on the United States' invasion of Iraq in 2003.
In 2014,
you Americans have created the
This is a British
States.
firm I'm quoting now.
Well, okay, the Islamic State
We
has been
created the Islamic State?
by the American policy.
America feeds the global war machine. American weapons are being used to undermine what American governments say they are fighting for: international peace and security.
Or is it business?
Hi everybody! Ever since the Russia-Ukraine war has started, you must have seen all the politicians from the US and Europe preach peace lessons to the world, and the Western media has been screaming to the world about how evil Putin is, how terrible the war has been, and how innocent people have been suffering. And looking at the way these presidents of the United States talk and deliver speeches, it feels as though they care so much for the innocent men, women and children involved in this war, right? But you know what, guys? Unfortunately, what we do not realize is that there is a very dark side to the geopolitics of the United States and the Europe, and the Western propaganda very cleverly hides it from all of us. And once you understand the ruthless actions of the West, it will make you question if they're really ambassadors of peace or just ruthless hypocrites who act only for their profits and not for the peace of the world. In fact, recently, the Foreign Minister of India even pointed out the hypocrisy of the West in many of his interviews. So in this episode today, let us use a case study to try and understand how does the United States play the Game of Thrones of geopolitics to dominate the world? How does the Western media propaganda very cleverly portray the US as a peacekeeper in spite of they doing terrible things? And most importantly, as citizens of India, what are the study materials to help you understand the brutal and hidden truth of geopolitics? This video is brought to you by Cuckoo FM, but more on this at the end of the video. The first strategy that the US uses is that of overthrowing an unsuitable leader and empowering the puppet. A classic example to understand this tactic of the United States is to understand the love affair of the US with Iran and Iraq. This is a story that dates way back to early 1900s. Now, during this time, the Industrial Revolution in the US and Europe was picking up and oil was becoming more and more important. But the problem we heard was that oil had not been discovered in UAE, Saudi and Iraq. So back then, Iran was one of the biggest suppliers of oil. But the catch over here was that although Iran had humongous oil fields, the government of Iran actually made very less money from their own oil. The question is, why? Well, that is because the Brits very cleverly established a joint venture with Iran called the Anglo-Iranian Company. And just like East India Company exploited the indigo farmers in India, this company extracted oil from Iran and made a deal such that the Brits got 84% of the profits and the Iranian people got only 16% of the profits.
How is that possible? Why would they let them take 84% of the profit? I don't understand that at all. Maybe he'll explain how that even went down.
So you see, this is such a sweet deal for the Brits that in spite of not having their own oil field, by using someone else's oil field in someone else's land, these people took away more than 80% of the profits. So it was practically a black gold mine for them.
But why did they agree to that?
But this is when Iran saw the rise of a new prime minister by the name Mohammad Mossadegh, and on 15th of March 1951, he simply nationalized the entire oil industry of Iran and asked the Brits to get out of Iran. So suddenly, Iran was about to emerge as a powerful nation because they had complete control over one of the largest reserves in the world. But you know what, guys? This guy who was about to bring massive fortunes to Iran and was about to change the face of Iran on the world stage, this guy gets overthrown by a coup and he is put on house arrest. The question is, why? Well, as it turns out, the Brits and CIA ran an anti-Mossadegh propaganda by portraying him as a threat to the Shah of Iran. And once enough people believed it, they arranged a coup, took him off power and gave the power to an obedient puppet called Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. He was already the Shah of Iran, so transfer of power was no big deal at all. And guess what? Within some time, everybody forgot about nationalization, and in the next 25 years, the British and American companies set up their plants in Iran. These companies included Exxon, Gulf Oil, Mobil, and Standard Oil of California. And these companies started extracting oil by giving a mere 50% share of profits to Iran. So the Brits and the US again made billions of dollars and started extracting from the oil reserves of Iran. In fact, the US even went one step further and sold $13 billion worth of weapons to Iran. This was the first strategy of the US, wherein they overthrow an unsuitable candidate and place a puppet who will make them a ton of money and give them access to valuable resources that did not even belong to them in the first place. This exploitation went on for the next 20 years until a religious revolution sparked up in Iran, which overthrew the government. This is when a leader named Ayatollah Khomeini rose to power, and again, he kicked the US and Brits out and nationalized the entire oil of Iran. So guess what? We are back to square one, right? The US has lost control over both the Iranian oil reserves and the weapons trade. Now the question is, what can US do? Well, this is where the second strategy of the US comes in, which is funding and weaponizing the opposition.
It was a very important year. 1982 was the year in which Ronald Reagan dropped Iraq from the list of states supporting terrorism so that the U.S. could start providing him with extensive aid, including military aid, including means to develop biological and chemical weapons and missiles and weapons of and nuclear weapons.
So I can understand the whole weaponizing the opposition, trying to get these countries armed. Why would you want to arm anyone with sea-burning weapons or with weapons of mass destruction? That's what I don't understand.
Weapons.
By this time, that is by 1979, the world had already found oil in UAE, Saudi and Iraq. And out of these countries, Iraq was in strong opposition to Iran and saw the emergence of a leader named Saddam Hussein. And this guy started the world-shaking Iran-Iraq war that went on for the next 9 years.
9 years.
So guess what? This time, instead of overthrowing the government in Iran, the United States sold weapons and funded Iraq to defeat Iran. So from 1983 onwards, Ronald Reagan, the then president of the United States, offered aids worth billions of dollars to Iraq. This included funding, weapons, and even military intelligence to make sure that the Iraqi army is able to destroy the attacks of Irani soldiers. So you see what happened over here? Both sides of war were sold US weapons, and now people were dying on both sides, property was being damaged in both sides, economy was collapsing in both sides, but the United States made money regardless. Then finally, after 8 years of war, 500,000 lives were lost, another million people were injured, and the economic cost of war exceeded $1 trillion, shattering the economies of both Iran and Iraq. Now mind you, all this while, Saddam Hussein was a ruthless dictator who massacred hundreds of thousands of people, and there were even estimates that say that he killed close to 2.5 lakh people in the process of a genocide, and even used chemical weapons and torturous poison gases to kill the Iranian army. But all throughout this time, the US, in spite of knowing all of this, kept on giving assistance to Iraq, and this led to one of the bloodiest wars in human history.
I feel like this is being ripped from a history book of the 1971 Indo-Pak War, when all the Bangladeshis were being slaughtered and the genocide was happening and all these war crimes were occurring. Because when Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon found out about what was going on, their reaction was to give more money and more aid to Pakistan to help them, even though they were doing horrible things to the Bangladeshis, to the East Pakistanis. So this is something that the U.S. has done before, and I would not be surprised if they did it again.
And eventually, the economic damage prevented both Iran and Iraq from becoming an oil superpower. But you know what, guys? This is where a small twist came in. Just like any other war, the Iran-Iraqi war destroyed the economies of both the countries, and Saddam Hussein had taken a huge loan as much as $37 billion from Saudi Arabia, UAE and others. And after the war, he was in no position to pay back the loans. And coincidentally, during that time, even OPEC lowered the price of oil, because of which Iraq's economy was crumbling. And this is where something crazy happened. Out of nowhere, Saddam Hussein decided to invade Kuwait, which is the 6th largest oil reserve in the world. But while most people thought that he was just giving out false threats, this is what happened on 2nd of August 1990.
Saddam had taken his gamble. Whether it was part of a plan to capture the world's oil supplies, whether he would go marching on to Saudi Arabia, America didn't wait to see.
Iraq will not be permitted to annex Kuwait. And that's not a threat, not a boast, just the way it's going to be.
The coalition took only 100 hours to destroy the Iraqi forces in Kuwait.
In the hours before Baghdad surrendered, the oil wells of Kuwait were set ablaze by Saddam's retreating army.
Kuwait, which produced 1.5 million barrels of oil a day before the war, till March of 1991, could produce none.
Now, as soon as this happened, the United States turned against the same Saddam Hussein whom they once supported. So the US formed a coalition of 35 countries and drove the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. So again, lots of weapons, lots of blood, lots of death and lots of damage. Now after the...
So 35 countries joined in this coalition. Now, was everyone's motivation oil and money? Or were there other reasons why they decided to join the United States?
The war, just like Russia today, Iraq was imposed with sanctions, the economy collapsed further and they were no longer a threat to US. So for some time, Saddam Hussein continued with his atrocity and Iraq continued to struggle with its economy. So after some years, everybody thought that the Saddam Hussein US episode was over. But 13 years later, the entire world was shocked to see this happen in 2003.
On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
Beyond President Bush's deadline for Saddam Hussein to leave Iraq, that U.S. warships and planes launched the opening salvo of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
So nearly 3 weeks after this war began, U.S. forces are now coming into the center of Baghdad. This is what regime change looks like.
So the question over here is, Iran and Iraq both were facing a crisis and they were no longer a threat to the US because both of them were far from being an oil superpower. Then the question is, why did the US invade Iraq? Well, as it turns out, after 1999, the demand of oil all across the world started increasing drastically. This was majorly because India and China both were beginning to consume an extraordinary amount of oil for their development. As a result, the oil prices started shooting up, going from just $21.57 in 1999 to $49.86 in 2002. And the reason why US invaded Iraq lies in this map. Here, you will see that Iraq had some of the biggest oil wells in the world. You see these dots? These dots indicate oil wells with more than 5 billion barrels of oil. In fact, even today, Iraq is the 5th largest oil reserve in the world. And the best part of Iraq was that the cost of extraction of oil in Iraq was very, very less. According to a study done in 2004, while in Saudi the cost of extraction was $4 per barrel, in Iran it was $4.5 per barrel, in Russia it was $7 per barrel, whereas in Iraq the cost of extraction was as low as $1 to $1.5 per barrel. So again, it was a black gold mine waiting to be extracted. So now the question over here is, how can the US justify the invasion of an economically weak and non-threatening country? And this is where the third strategy of the US comes in, which is to use propaganda. And this is where the third strategy of the US comes in, which is to use storytelling to educate the world about the potential threats that they would eliminate because they are the saviors of the world. And how did they do that?
I just want to add my 2 cents in very quickly, but that fake cut he just did with the whole propaganda, yeah, that was pretty good.
For this, the United States used the horrific 9/11 incidents as an excuse to sneak into Iraq. And they somehow told a story that Iraq and Saddam Hussein were involved in the 9/11 attacks and even speculated that Saddam Hussein was developing weapons of mass destruction.
Saddam Hussein has gone to elaborate lengths, spent enormous sums, taken great risks to build and keep weapons of mass destruction.
Saddam Hussein is determined to get his hands on a nuclear bomb.
Both of which, by the way, did not have any concrete proof at all. And secondly, they started painting Saddam Hussein as an evil man who did terrible things to people like using chemical weapons, genocide and mass murders. But the most disturbing fact of all over here is that during the 1980s, the same United States gave military assistance to the same Saddam Hussein, after which he dropped chemical weapons on the Irani soldiers. But during that time, he was beneficial for the US, so nobody bothered about it. And everything that he was being blamed for in 2002 and 3, that is genocide, mass murders and tortures, he was already doing that even during the 1980s. And you see this picture, I call this the picture of Western hypocrisy. You see this guy, this is US envoy Mr. Donald Rumsfeld. This guy provided Iraq with weapons in 1983, and 20 years later in 2003, the same guy actually oversaw the invasion of Iraq that got Saddam Hussein killed. And unlike the Russian invasion, which is being considered as a cruel act against mankind, the US invasion was considered as a liberation. And the harsh truth over here is that the invasion of Iraq killed a minimum of 134,000 people. But even then, it was portrayed as an act of peace to protect the world from weapons of mass destruction. So if killing 134,000 people isn't mass destruction, I don't know what is. And not so surprisingly, after the invasion, Saddam Hussein was hanged, the Iraqi oil industry was privatized, and again, US oil companies like Exxon and Chevron set up their bases in Iraq, and since then till today, they've been extracting billions of dollars worth of oil from Iraq. This is how the United States plays the Game of Thrones of geopolitics using warfare, weaponizing and storytelling. Now you decide for yourself if this is ethically right or wrong. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.
So before I get into it, I'm going to acknowledge that I'm a very proud US Army veteran, and yes, I did deploy to Baghdad in 05 to 06 as a combat medic. Now, am I proud of everything my country has done? No. Some people might look at this video and say, I'm a United States Army veteran, I'm agreeing with this anti-American, anti-West propaganda that thinkschool is spouting off on their channel. That is completely untrue. thinkschool is very unbiased. They get all their information from reliable sources. They do days, weeks, months of research for every single video. They're not making things up willy-nilly. And thinkschool is not anti-American or anti-West. I think they're just anti-corruption and anti-evil. He's just pointing out all the crappy, horrible things that we've done. And he is right on point. I think something to differentiate is that you can be against the corrupt government of a country, but still have respect for the average citizens. After all, one thing that we all have in common is that every country, whether it be Russia, India, Finland, Canada, the United States, Scotland, we are all being governed by either a person or a government. And in many cases, there are corrupt and evil people in charge. Which is not surprising, since the invention of politics back thousands of years ago, there have been corrupt and evil politicians. I mean, that is not new. With that being said, a lot of what I just saw in the video, it's not surprising. And a lot of it I have actually heard before. I did watch that one Dear America Beer Biceps podcast with Mr. Chavda and Ren V, and they did talk about some of this actually. So a lot of this is not really new. This is a history lesson of what these evil people in power have done and will probably continue to do unless you're stopped. That's how I think of it. So I can watch this video with an open mind and not get offended. I am not a Karen. I'm not into this woke BS. No, I can appreciate what he's saying, and I can agree with a lot or all of it, actually. Anyway, I do think that this topic does deserve some good discussion, so I open up my comments to anyone who wants to share their thoughts. And also, that Dear America podcast I was talking about, it's right here. Thanks for watching.